This is WWE superstar Drew McIntyre, and you're listening to the WWE Podcast.
The champ is
the one that everybody wants, me.
Becky Lynch is going to WrestleMania. Claymore!
Austin 316 says I just whipped your ass. This is my iron. You're going to acknowledge me.
Welcome to the current state of WWE, everybody. We are back, as always, every Monday night. It's April 17th, 2023, and tonight we've got a bit of a different topic as we are driving closer and closer to the draft in just a couple of weeks. Anthony DeMarco and I are back tonight to not just talk about the draft, but kind of have our own little fantasy draft where we're each going to not necessarily do a top 5 or a top 10, but rather just look at Raw and SmackDown, and for both of us, what we would do for kind of the foundational pieces of each show. So I hope that's clear to everybody. It's not going to be a, he picks, I pick kind of thing. It's just, he's going to, have his core on SmackDown and Raw. I'm going to have my cores for SmackDown and Raw and that kind of thing. But Anthony, welcome to the show. This should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it should be. I think draft time always sparks a lot of conversation. And it's almost like if you're watching sports when the trade deadline comes around or free agency opens, it always makes for good theater and good entertainment. That's exactly what WWE is. It is quite self-proclaimed as sports entertainment. And I think when you bring in something like the draft, where you could bring in some of that drama, you could, bring some anticipation, like who's going to be wrestling on one night, the other night, red, blue, all that, the way they market it. I think it's great for stuff like this where you just want to talk wrestling, and when you abide by the brand split rules 100%, which we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt that they will, even though they don't deserve it. But for the exercise of this show, pardon me, we're going to assume that it will mean that it will come with fresh programs, fresh rivalries, and maybe even some fresh new characters.
That's exactly right. That is what we're going to assume. I'm glad you brought that up, that, as much as you and I have a massive concern, valid concern, that this is going to be a draft that WWE violates within, I'd say, the first month of them implementing the rules, we're going to just go with, take them at face value. They're going to adhere to their own rules. That way it makes this a little bit more fun, because I think the biggest benefit of the draft is it gives new guys more time to shine than they otherwise would. It creates two separate worlds. It allows you to kind of fantasy book of massive matchups when, oh my God, this, somebody from SmackDown's on Raw, and actually have that make it feel like something that shouldn't happen. So that, those are I think some of the biggest benefits. So we're going to take those benefits at face value. And I'm going to toss it to you. So, how do you want to touch on SmackDown or Raw first for your foundational pieces? I'll leave that up to you.
Well, I'm going to go with the A show, SmackDown, and it's weird to say, right? Because it always felt like you would start with Raw and then the rest would kind of fall into place. But I don't think that there's any denying the fact that for the last 2 years and maybe coming up on 3 years now, SmackDown has been the A show, going all the way back into the Thunderdome during the pandemic era. SmackDown has been the show to watch. And I think that's why you have to just start first and foremost with the best show in professional wrestling right now. And I think that's fair to say, even if you want to go to Impact or ROH or AEW, I think SmackDown is the undisputed champion, no pun intended, in terms of wrestling programming. So starting there, I think the low-hanging fruit is, you're keeping the bloodline on SmackDown. I know maybe some people find it tired, but they are pillars of SmackDown. They define SmackDown. It's like peanut butter and jelly. Obviously, we've had them go to Monday Night Raw with the Usos having been the undisputed tag champs and Roman Reigns being the undisputed champion for both shows. But I think all in all, they are SmackDown guys. They predominantly live over on SmackDown. So low-hanging fruit to start off with, but the bloodline has to stay on SmackDown.
Yeah, and I'll call you on that. I'm thinking of a poker reference. I will meet you. I'll meet your bet, because I would agree with that. Not only are they the faces, some of the faces, major faces of SmackDown, but I think also the Fox executives have a say in this, and I think that they have a bit of an input in who they want on SmackDown. It is the A show. I would totally agree, though, even if Fox doesn't have a say or whatever, that they should remain. I would draft them to SmackDown. I don't think they would fit well on Raw. You look forward to SmackDown because that is where a lot of the bloodline progression of the stories continues, and Raw's, if something happens on Raw in a storyline with the bloodline, it's kind of a bonus or unexpected. So SmackDown is just it's great. It's a great mix with the bloodline. I would agree. And to raise you and see what your response is to this, I would actually move the entire Judgment Day to SmackDown. I think the Judgment Day as an entire group, meaning Damian Priest, Dominic Mysterio, Rhea Ripley, obviously she's the SmackDown Women's Champion. Kind of makes sense that she would move to SmackDown and have the entire group come to SmackDown. That's just my take. What do you think?
No, I think that's absolutely a good choice. And Rhea Ripley is the SmackDown Women's Champion, so it would make sense. And you have those guys really competing on SmackDown more times than not. Like we saw this past week, Damian Priest versus Santos Escobar. That's a nice little rivalry going. And I think that that's something that could freshen up the Judgment Day a bit. And not that they haven't been good. They've been among the best programming in WWE right now, or among the best on WWE programming. I think that's the better verbiage. But it feels like on Raw, they've kind of run its course. Maybe that's just because they've only been feuding with Edge predominantly, but I could see them over on SmackDown, and they kind of fit the bill there. But one guy, I think a major addition that I would move over to SmackDown, because I think that the options are limitless over on the Blue Brand, would be Bobby Lashley. What do you think about that?
Ooh, I thought you were going to say somebody else.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, no, so Bobby Lashley right now is in a bit of a program with Bronson Reed, and he's just trying to help create Bronson Reed, help him get to that next level. This past week they had a double count out, so there was no winner, but I think that's not a bad option. You could have him face Roman Reigns. I think that is a program that is waiting to happen. Not that I don't think he dethroned Roman, but it's a fun new program. Bobby Lashley needs kind of a kick in the ass when it comes to his career. Just kind of a different thing to do. He's been getting a little stale on Raw. If they're not going to have the Hurt Business get back together, because they were, then they weren't. Now I guess they're not. I don't know. Then if he's a single entity coming over to SmackDown, he could really shake things up. I would agree. He's a really good addition to SmackDown, especially interacting with the Bloodline.
Well, since he returned to WWE in 2018, he's only been exclusive to Raw. He's never moved to SmackDown in any of the drafts. So I think it would really freshen him up, especially given the fact that if you go all the way back to 2005, he started on SmackDown. So I think that would be kind of a homecoming of sorts. And the other pillar of SmackDown, both now and presumably for the both of us in this fantasy land of the draft, is Gunther and Imperium. And I think we've already talked about that. We don't want Gunther going anywhere, right where he is on SmackDown. And imagine Gunther versus Bobby Lashley for the Intercontinental Championship.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, certainly you could. Yes. To me, though, since I proposed that we had the Judgment Day go to SmackDown, there usually has to be a trade of equal reaction the opposite way. And if I'm going to have the Judgment Day go to SmackDown, Imperium to Raw is kind of an equal trade. It's close. It's close enough to make a case. Again, though, I would agree that you have Gunther, who is the biggest star in that group without a question. He could face Roman Reigns. As you said, he could face Bobby Lashley. But if we're going to make an equal trade and not completely, strip Raw and not give back, then I would agree. But I mean, what would you do with Imperium, though?
I would keep Imperium where they are, just because I think they're so crucial to SmackDown, and I would probably send the Brawling Brutes to Monday Night Raw.
Okay.
And along with the Brutes, even though he's not really a part of them, and assuming he stays in WWE, I think you're sending Drew to Monday Night Raw as well, who probably is in most desperate need of the brand split or the draft than anyone right now. So to compensate for Lashley and the Judgment Day going over to SmackDown, I would have Drew and the Brawling Brutes going over to Monday Night Raw. Do you think that would be a fair trade?
Yes, I do. And boy, I mean, I'm glad you brought up Drew because, I mean, we've all heard the rumors. He's not happy. He blacked his Twitter out. It's the 2C's cashing creative he's not happy with. And there's been worries that, I mean, I don't know when his contract is up, but I would imagine it's kind of coming close to renewal time and that he wants out and all these things. Again, we don't know, what's true and what's not, but when rumors tend to consolidate into a single narrative that he is wanting to get out, it's something to consider, and where he'd go, who knows. Of course, AEW seems to be the instant reaction people have, but if he stays with WWE, I think that is a fair trade of having him go to Monday Night Raw and get a kind of a fresh start. Now, one name I can't believe we haven't talked about yet, but this has to happen. This is probably he'd be a number one pick in my mind, and that's Seth Rollins. I mean, Seth Rollins coming to SmackDown is a slam dunk, is it not?
Yeah, it's weird to say that because he has always been known as Monday Night Rollins. And when he went to SmackDown, I believe in 2021 during the pandemic era, it kind of felt forced. And he was like the second heel under Roman Reigns. And maybe that's why it didn't make a whole lot of sense. He was living in Roman's shadow. But at this point, he would be stepping up one-on-one to Roman Reigns. And I think that Seth Rollins has kind of run its course on Monday Night Raw. In a lot of ways, he's helped carry Monday Night Raw without a world championship. But you bring him over to SmackDown now as a babyface, rekindle that rivalry that was never brought back up after they faced each other at the Rumble in 2022. I think it is a slam dunk because even now you're looking at the SmackDown roster and they don't really have a top tier babyface. You ran through Drew, you kind of ran through Kevin Owens, but he's still on Monday Night Raw. Like, Roman Reigns needs a top tier babyface over on SmackDown. Sami Zayn, you've been there, done that. The last guy he faced is a Raw guy in Cody Rhodes. So you bring in Seth Rollins over to SmackDown. You bring Bobby Lashley over to SmackDown. Those are two big time level babyfaces, specifically Rollins, and you line up Roman Reigns probably all the way into the fall if you want to be honest. And the last major guy that I see maybe going to SmackDown, and then we can maybe pivot to Monday Night Raw here. Mm-hmm. But what about Randy Orton?
Well, I guess that depends where Riddle goes, because I think where Riddle goes, Orton will follow, at least in the short term, because that's a good point. If Randy Orton goes to SmackDown, boy, that seems to leave Raw kind of high and dry, and we can look at the potential stars that could come to Raw. We already talked about Drew, but yeah, Randy Orton coming to SmackDown, that almost seems like a lock too, only because how do we not get Randy Orton, Roman Reigns? And I know we're still talking about Roman here. A lot of this is centering around Roman and the guys that he could face, but I mean, let's call a spade a spade. He's still the biggest thing in WWE right now, and Randy Orton coming back and facing Roman Reigns at some point, if it's got to happen at some point this year, you'd imagine, then he's got to go to SmackDown. I mean, if they want that program, they've got to do it, because if they go to Raw and then violate their own rules, again, we're not going to go there, they can't do it. So yeah, I mean, just for the Roman factor and the fact that a year ago, it's nearly been a full year that they took out Randy to get his revenge, it makes sense, no?
Yep, I think so. And you talk about like leaving Raw high and dry, but like in a lot of ways, you're just sending a lot of these established guys over to SmackDown because there's so many untapped rivalries, one-on-one with Roman Reigns and Randy Orton, rekindling what he had with Seth Rollins. He's never really crossed paths with Bobby Lashley since they first competed in 2018 when Roman Reigns was still the big dog, so I don't even count that. Or actually, he collided remember that weird faction that Lashley had with Corbin and Drew McIntyre that faced off against the Shield in like early 2019?
3MB?
I guess that was the last. Yes. No. Oh no, not 3MB. Imagine 3MB. But it's been at least 4 years since they've stepped up to one another because they've both been on separate brands. And now Roman's completely reinvented himself. Lashley's a 2-time world champion now. Like, Roman Reigns versus Bobby Lashley, if you're ever getting to that program, is that not the best part of having a true brand split when moments like this finally come to be?
Yes. It's exactly what this is supposed to bring. The excitement of new matchups, shaking things up. Let's have two separate worlds. Oh, wow, we haven't seen Lashley and Roman yet. This is going to be a lot of fun. It's exactly one of the biggest benefits of SmackDown. Now, before we shift to Raw, I just have to ask you about the women's division. Do you think we have any, if you could just pick one of the women coming to SmackDown, who do you think could be one of those women coming to SmackDown? I know we mentioned Rhea Ripley. She's a SmackDown Women's Champion, but do you see any other ones outside of Rhea?
Maybe it's low-hanging fruit, but I'm thinking Becky Lynch because she's kind of gone a bit stale on Monday Night Raw. We haven't seen her versus Rhea Ripley. She's been on Monday Night Raw since 2019, I want to say, when she won the championship or both championships at WrestleMania 35. And she was the first ever woman drafted over to SmackDown in 2016. She was the first ever SmackDown Women's Champion. Like, Becky Lynch's history has a big tie to the SmackDown brand. And I think that Becky Lynch going to SmackDown on a fresh brand to go up against Rhea Ripley, I think that's something that I would do.
I would agree with that, and it's also strengthened by the fact that you have Seth Rollins and Becky who are married, and WWE has been keeping them together. It makes sense. Their the travel plans, their child together, all that kind of thing. So I think wherever Becky goes, Seth follows, or rather vice versa. So yeah, I would think that's a solid pick. So all right, Monday Night Raw. Who is or what is one of your big moves to Monday Night Raw? I know we already mentioned Drew as a potential pick, but what else?
Honestly, this goes aside from the guys that I think that are going to stay there in terms of the current pillars. I think Cody Rhodes and Austin Theory stay right where they are positioned on Monday Night Raw to be the pillars. And Cody Rhodes presumably ends up being the world champion of Monday Night Raw, whether that's a new belt or the WWE Championship coming over. And I'm okay with that. Even though I'm not a Cody Rhodes fan, I do think he's proved that he is main event caliber. But in my mind, one of the biggest acquisitions for Monday Night Raw, LA Knight. He makes all the sense in the world to go to Monday Night Raw. I think he would explode on Monday Night Raw. Maybe him and Austin Theory could butt heads in terms of their positioning on the card, the roles they play. But Raw has that extra hour, and that's the big wild card here, is that you could have LA Knight and Austin Theory maybe exist simultaneously in some way. And to be honest, it's only a matter of time before they turn Austin Theory babyface. If we're calling a spade, he's an up-and-comer. They brought him in as a heel exactly as they should have. Very Randy Orton-esque, but maybe in a year or two you have a babyface Austin Theory when he eventually and inevitably gets into that main event scene, and LA Knight could kind of maybe be his natural successor in that role. So for me, LA Knight, a massive addition to Monday Night Raw, and he screams Monday Night Raw to me.
LA Knight, I every week, every time I have a podcast, I just can't. I sing his praises. So I agree. LA Knight to Raw to me, it's close to a lock. I think he would thrive on Monday Night Raw, and I tweeted this out, but I think it's worth mentioning, not because I said it, but just because I think it's true, is that LA Knight is. Think about how over he is right now, the reactions he gets right now, and he's won one match by distraction. At the last 3 months, he's lost every other match. He doesn't get as much promo time nearly as he should. He didn't even appear at all on WrestleMania, and yet he's still this over. Imagine when WWE actually decides to say, "Oh, we should get behind this dude." I mean, they haven't even done anything with him other than he gets decent. He has good matches, and he's with prominent stars, but he loses and loses and loses and loses. No mic time, no WrestleMania, and he's still this over. So once the machine gets behind him, I think LA Knight is going to skyrocket to stardom, and that just shows you how untapped of a potential he has right now. And I'm really excited for LA Knight coming to Monday Night Raw. And on the heels of LA Knight, do you think that? And I think it's possible Bray Wyatt, if he returns, going to Monday Night Raw.
That's where I was exactly going with it, because you have to send him to Monday Night Raw just to freshen it up a bit, because it just went so poorly on SmackDown. And it sucks because I think that organically he's always felt like a SmackDown guy to me, Bray Wyatt, that is. Both times he's been a world champion, he's been a member on the SmackDown brand. Well, actually, the 3 times he was a world champion, it all took place on SmackDown. But you have to freshen this up. And, maybe you bring him back, you have him feud with Drew McIntyre or Cody Rhodes. We could get into maybe some other baby faces they could send over to Monday Night Raw or what have you. But I think he's a baby face. I think. What is he? I forget. He is a baby face?
Who's this?
If I'm not mistaken.
Who is this?
Bray Wyatt.
They've never really established him as anything. He's just kind of himself, but we've always cheered him because he's so compelling. Even when they were trying to push him as a heel as the Fiend, he's a baby face. Yeah.
Yeah. So you bring him over to Monday Night Raw. You have Austin Theory. Obviously, you're not going to go down the road again with LA Knight. In my opinion, another guy at the lower end of the card that should switch to Monday Night Raw would be Karrion Kross. So Karrion Kross versus Bray Wyatt could be interesting if Bray Wyatt ever gets back on the rails. So yeah, I think Bray Wyatt absolutely has to be a member on Monday Night Raw because we just brought it up. You're losing the star power in Seth Rollins, in Bobby Lashley, in, I guess, to a lesser extent, who was the guy we just talked about on SmackDown? Randy Orton, because he hasn't been there for so long, and presumably Riddle as well. You need something to compensate for that. So, again, assuming you have him on Monday Night Raw, or all those guys on SmackDown, you need Bray Wyatt to compensate for that. And this is assuming that he's back and healthy and ready to compete. Aside from that, and maybe this is difficult because of where the bloodline would be placed, but you have to imagine it's eventually coming to a head. Would you have Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens as Monday Night Raw guys? I know they're unified tag team champions right now, or undisputed tag champs, which gives them the right to float between brands. But when they aren't champs, do you think they would be Raw guys?
When they dissolve, when they get rid of those belts and they're eventually losing them, probably in I would say SummerSlam at the earliest. Yeah, I think they should be, because while they could fight the bloodline forever, eventually they're going to need new opponents. And you know, so yes, I would have them on Monday Night Raw.
And I think that gives Monday Night Raw more arsenal, because I don't think that they're going to be a long-term tag team. They are single competitors predominantly. And you split those two up on Monday Night Raw, and you give yourself so many other toys in the tool chest, or whatever the analogy is. But the small switch that I just suggested, I know he hasn't done a lot since coming back to WWE, but Karrion Kross, like, I don't know why, but there's something about Karrion Kross that does intrigue me. I'm not a huge Scarlett fan. The entrance is a bit too hokey, but there's something there with Karrion Kross. Yeah. Is he a guy you think that could benefit from the draft?
He's exactly the type of performer that you would look at and say yes, because he's not somebody that if there wasn't a draft, he'll get a whole lot of attention, because there's singular storylines running through both brands, which is, as we mentioned at the top, one of the big benefits to guys that are up and coming. More time for people that otherwise wouldn't get it. So yes, I think he is going to be a big benefactor. I mean, I think what makes it work, as kind of gimmicky as he is, and all of the crows and all the stuff that happens during his entrance, what makes it really work for him is that he is believable on the microphone. He's got a realism about him. He's kind of got a bit of an LA Knight factor in a way, where I mean, I'd like to see those two go off like on a promo against one another. They're both kind of in the same position, although I'd put LA Knight as a higher ceiling right now, but he's got that kind of gravitas to him on the screen. Like, you pay attention to what he has to say, even if it is a little hokey. So yes, I would say yes to answer your question. Now, kind of rebounding, what about Big E? Do you think Big E could be someone that they bring to Raw?
That's so tough. Like, it feels so long ago that we saw Big E.
I know.
I feel like he's going to go back with the New Day. It feels like that's what they're going to do. They're maybe just going to default back to what they know. And I think maybe you keep him on SmackDown, because maybe that gives him... Because on SmackDown, if we're looking around, like, I heard it, you bring up on the Weekend Review, him maybe going toe-to-toe with Imperium and Gunther for the Intercontinental Championship. If you have the Judgment Day over there, maybe that's another faction that it would seem that SmackDown would be pretty faction heavy. So maybe it would be good to have the New Day over on Monday Night Raw. But to me, the New Day, again, maybe I'm going too much based on history and just assuming that Big E would be back in the New Day, but they've always seemed more SmackDown to me. So I think they would keep him there. Now, if they want to push him as a single star again, then yeah, Monday Night Raw, because of how open Monday Night Raw would be in this fantasy draft world that we're talking about. Because on SmackDown, it would pretty much be laid out, the main event scene that is, for the foreseeable future, because you'd have Roman as the champ with Seth, Orton, and Bobby Lashley waiting in the wings for that fresh type of matchup. And I think in the pecking order, Big E would probably come forth on that list. So yeah, if you're going to push him as a single star, it would have to be on Raw. But if you're going to put him back in the New Day, probably on SmackDown.
Well, yeah, that I probably should have clarified, because they kind of half-assed his push as a single star. Yes, he became champion, but even as champion, he was every chance they got associating him with the New Day backstage, or it's a pay-per-view. Both brands are here, and he's dancing like a fool to the trumpet with Xavier Woods and all that. That really, I think, regressed his character and held him back. So it depends if they want to just keep him with the New Day for the rest of his life, which is seemingly what they want to do, or if they actually want to give it a full, real try, disassociate him from the New Day, make him his own dude, and go for a Intercontinental, or if he goes to Raw, the U.S. title against Austin Theory. Austin Theory needs new guys to work with. I think Big E and Austin Theory would be a lot of fun. So yeah, that really is a good question, is what do they see Big E doing? Is it still with the with New Day? And actually, I think, unfortunately, at least in the short term, it probably is, based on what's going on now on SmackDown with Xavier Woods poking Imperium this past week. I think what's going to happen is that we're going to have a Kofi return, and then, it's 3-on-2, and then here comes Big E. It's 3-on-3, and it's New Day versus Imperium. I think that's coming, and they planted the seed for that this past week on SmackDown. So maybe I answered my own question.
What about a guy like Braun Strowman? Now, I know that he hasn't really had any success in the way of the main event since coming back. He is kind of an ass. I don't know if we could say that, but in real life, he's kind of showed himself to be kind of a jerk. But I do think he is a valuable asset. You need good big men who can work, and for his size, he's probably among the best WWE has ever had. I still think it was a good decision to bring him back. Has kind of found his home in the tag team division alongside Ricochet. What would you do with Braun Strowman? Would you keep him where he is with Ricochet on SmackDown? Would you move him and Ricochet over to Monday Night Raw? Would you make him a single star on either particular brand? What would you do with a guy like Braun Strowman?
Yeah, for now, I mean, I think he's got a little chemistry. He's got a little something going with Ricochet. I mean, again, personal feelings aside about him being an actual D-bag in person, in real life, I mean, it is what it is. But as far as on screen, yeah, I mean, I'm all for bolstering the tag team division. That always seems to need help, particularly with the women, but the men too. And I think that you have Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens who are going to need opponents, even if they're baby faces. They're going to need opponents. And I think down the line, you could have Braun Strowman and Ricochet, if they're still a team, be able to be those next challengers in line or be contenders. I mean, if you dissolve them, then, I think they're a nice babyface tag team that doesn't have a lot of babyface tag teams going on. I mean, I think are a valuable asset, even if they don't get a whole lot of camera time. This past week, they were assaulted by the Viking Raiders, who kind of come in and out of relevancy. But I would keep them together, at least for the foreseeable future. And if you want to move them to Raw after Backlash, then, so be it. I mean, I think, honestly, you could do anything with them. I think they're very kind of flexible. I mean, you could have them on Raw, you could have them on SmackDown, but either way, I would keep them as a team.
That's exactly what Braun Strowman and also Ricochet, what they are. Like, just because they're, I guess, mid-card guys at best and could flirt with the Intercontinental or U.S. title, although Braun Strowman had a half-decent run as the Universal Champion during the COVID era. But, I mean, they're good utility guys. Like, you need guys like that, guys that you could kind of plug and play, tag team, IC title picture, lower card personal feud. Like, if you ever split Braun Strowman from Ricochet, which is far down the line, because I completely agree that there's still a lot of tread left on that tire in the tag team, like, he's a guy that, like, you could see him feuding with a guy like Karrion Kross at the lower end of the card. Like, I remember just like a random feud from the Ruthless Aggression era I really enjoyed for some stupid reason was Gene Snitsky versus Kane.
Yes.
Or, you know what I mean?
It wasn't my fault.
Like,
yeah.
just Yeah, it wasn't my fault. Punted the baby into the crowd. Like, just a stupid rivalry of two big men, but it worked. And I think like Karrion Kross versus Braun Strowman is something that could work in that regard. And in a lot of ways, not as good, obviously, but Braun Strowman has kind of become the new Kane in terms of what he means to that roster.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't think of that analogy. And all I could picture was Gene Siskey punting the baby now. I mean, that's burned in my memory. Those of you that don't know what we're talking about, just go back. I think it was like 04, somewhere around there.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my God.
It wasn't my
fault.
It literally started his theme song.
Yeah, I mean, guys, this was a storyline over a miscarriage. All right, like that's how far back this was. All right, where it was acceptable to talk about miscarriages on Raw. I mean, and many other things. Anyway, yes, I mean, I think that's a good analogy. And I think that having, as you said, and as I said, I think you could make these two guys anything you need them to be. And it's okay that you don't think of them as defined roles anywhere, because you need guys that can do these kinds of things and fill roles as you need them. They can be singles. You could put them as a tag team. For now, I'd keep them as a tag team, but they could split easily and go off on their own again. And I think that's a valuable thing to have, even if you don't look at them and go, oh, they're definitely this or definitely that. I think it's okay. But as we kind of wrap this up, two big names I want your take on. We don't need to go super in depth, but two big legacy stars we haven't talked about, Brock Lesnar and Edge. Where would you put them?
Honestly, probably both on Monday Night Raw. Edge, just because he has to get as far away from the Judgment Day as humanly possible. For all I care, you could put him on NXT at this point, or the defunct AEW, just because he has to be far away. And Brock, I just think that he's always been Monday Night Raw since he returned. And that's weird to say, because back in the Ruthless Aggression era, he was the face of SmackDown. Him and Kurt Angle like single-handedly made SmackDown a relevant standalone brand in a lot of ways. But I just think both of those guys are Raw guys. And it's weird, but it seems that more often than not, the legacy guys just kind of live on Monday Night Raw. Like, look at John Cena. He was originally drafted to SmackDown in 2016. And then as soon as he became part-time and moved into that legacy role, he just kind of like morphed into exclusively to Raw. Now he shows up on SmackDown from time to time, when he had the tag match with the Owens against the Bloodline around New Year's Eve or whatever it was. But it just feels, maybe it's the extra hour, maybe it's the lineage of Monday Night Raw. I don't know what it is, but I just kind of default to saying Monday Night Raw. And at this point in their career, I feel like Edge and Brock kind of belong on Raw.
I would agree. I mean, again, biggest reason is since Judgment Day is, Judgment Day is going to SmackDown. I think that's a very solid decision to make, or rather a solid prediction. And yeah, Edge needs to get the hell away. Get away. You can't be on the same brand. I would absolutely agree that you're going to keep Edge on Raw, which again, he shows up every 3 months, and I actually believe he'll extend his career to WrestleMania 40 and probably call it a career there. But Raw is kind of where the big stars that return live. And when they make that return, Raw, even though it's not, they call it the flagship show, yet SmackDown gets better ratings and is the better overall show. Raw is sometimes viewed, or still viewed, by management, and I'm sure Vince, to whatever extent, it's kind of their baby. It's their firstborn. It's been around longer. It has more history, all this and that. But SmackDown is clearly the better show. But I would agree. I mean, Brock should stay on Raw. And we have, because we don't need Brock and Roman interacting at all. I don't think there's any need for that. And I would agree with that. So, all right. Well, I mean, there's so much more we could talk about with, especially the women's division. We didn't talk a whole lot about that with potentially where Charlotte Flair goes, or Ronda Rousey, wherever the hell she is, wherever they go. But, hey, maybe we could do a part 2 next week as we get closer to Monday Night Raw and SmackDown. That'll have the draft in a couple of weeks. But before we go, let everyone know, your latest show and when it drops.
Yeah, so last week, my triumphant return after a 2-week hiatus because of WrestleMania and then me losing power for almost 3 days. But I covered the Rumble from 2005. It actually stemmed from me watching the the A&E. I almost said A and W after that. The A&E WWE rivals between Triple H and Batista and that kind of point in time. And obviously the hilariousness of Shane McMahon and Triple H and Vince McMahon tearing all of their quads, and the funniest of all, or the infamous of all, Vince McMahon happening at the Royal Rumble 05. And going back and covering that, all the rivalries and storylines intertwined into that one pay-per-view was crazy. Like, we talk about SmackDown versus Raw and seeing guys face off against one another who never crossed paths before and how special it feels. And the Rumble 05 was the dawn of the Kurt Angle, Shawn Michaels rivalry that we came to know as one of the best of the Ruthless Aggression era. You know, arguably one of the best matches in the history of WrestleMania at WrestleMania 21. And obviously you have the unplanned finish, which turned into one of the most historic finishes in WWE history in terms of the Royal Rumble, and then Batista going on to win that Rumble, going on to culminate one of the best told stories in wrestling history, in my opinion, with him and Triple H. So yeah, just an overall fantastic pay-per-view. And next, or this coming week, I will finally be covering JBL's WWE Championship run on SmackDown during the 2004-2005 era.
Awesome. No, that is a great topic. Royal Rumble 05, one that if you live through it, you'll never forget it, even if it was for a silly moment of Vince. And him, the best part about it was of him hitting his legs, and he didn't feel like it looked like he was in any pain, but then when he tried to stand, it's one of the funniest things you'll ever see, with him trying to stand with just like totally buckled and like sitting there. It's just so funny. But outside of that, outside of the silliness, yes, I would agree. A very kind of a culmination point for a lot of different programs that led to WrestleMania that year, WrestleMania 21. Totally a great topic. And of course, as you mentioned, this coming week with JBL and his title run that lasted 10 months was at that time, it felt like infinity. And yet now we look back and we're like, 10 months. Hey, I mean, what's that? That's like a blink of an eye compared to Roman's run. But
what a great era of wrestling. Just 04, 05.
It really was. I mean, even though you had Rock and Austin gone at that point, one due to injury, one due to Hollywood, you had their two biggest stars gone. It still was it was the peak of Ruthless Aggression, I think. You still had Brock in there. Well, actually, Brock left in 04.
He had just left too.
Yeah. Brock just left too. So, but you still had HBK. You had Triple H, right? You had Chris Benoit. You had some amazing wrestlers. And, so good topics. Looking forward to this coming Friday. And I'm sure we will be talking next week as we get closer to the draft.
Looking forward to it, man. Have a good week.
You too. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the WWE Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss a show, or head to WWEpodcast.com. And for all of these shows ad-free, head over to patreon.com/WWE Podcast. Until then, we'll see you next time.